Obviously, right now, we are in the narrative of Queen Kamala carrying everything before her, can do no wrong, cruising to victory, etc. But there is time for one more turn, I think, one more major turn of the narrative, and we may just see it. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Steve Hilton Show. It is Monday, August the 19th. That's when I'm taping this. It's the first day of the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. And guess what? It's Biden's big day. But you know what's happening? They can't wait to see the back of him. So he's going to get all the glory and the praise. Oh, this amazing, selfless hero who laid down his career for the good of the party and the country. What absolute rubbish. They know it's rubbish. We all know it's rubbish. He had to be dragged kicking and screaming out of there. They can't wait to see the back of him. So can the rest of the country not wait to see the back of him because he was such a total disaster. But this whole thing captures the complete schizophrenia at the heart of this convention and at the heart of this whole campaign that we're now in the midst of, which is they can't decide where they stand on this Biden-Harris transition. Because on the one hand, they're saying that this is the carrying the torch, Biden's passing the torch to Kamala Harris. She's carrying the torch now, and it's the Biden agenda. And if you look at the platform that's been adopted, it literally still talks about, and it's amazingly incompetent, by the way. You can't quite believe this is where they've landed, but it's absolutely true. The platform literally has his name in it, Joe Biden, and talks about Biden's second term and all of this. The actual platform, they couldn't even get their act together to just sort of delete the word Biden and replace it with Harris. Amazing. Anyway, so on the one hand, they're saying this is Biden, second term effectively, and the most clear articulation of that came from Susan Rice, and here's the quote: Kamala Harris has been an integral architect and executor of the policies of the Biden-Harris administration. So on the one hand, this is all just continuity, no change at all, continuity. She's just steaming ahead, right? The co-pilot has taken over and it's no change. Same policies, same direction, because, of course, she was the architect and executor of the policies of the Biden-Harris administration. Now it's just the Harris-Walz administration, but it's going to be the same, basically. Same platform, same name in the platform, etc. That's one argument that they're making. And I don't quite understand why they're even making that argument, because the verdict on the policies of the Biden-Harris administration is entirely negative. I mean, they're seen to have failed on every single issue. There's nothing where the voters give them credit for having had any kind of success. So why they want to keep saying this when they no longer need to, because Biden's gone, he's in the rearview mirror after the first night, and he's literally, leaving town. I don't quite understand, but still, they're trying to make out that there's no change. On the other hand, the whole point of switching them out was to project a message of change, because when you have a situation in the wider electorate, which is what we have, which is that people think more people think that the country is headed in the wrong direction, and therefore it is a change election, and so that favors Trump, who's been out of power. Then of course the Democrats want to also take on the mantle of the change that the country needs and invest that in Kamala Harris. So on the one hand, they're saying no change. On the other hand, saying, yeah, big change. Kamala Harris, big change. And so they're trying to convey this sense of her new agenda and how she's totally different. And she's got a new policy agenda. And she's not using the same language. And he talked about democracy. And now she's talking about freedom and all the rest of it. And of course, most importantly for them, trying to distance her from the Biden-Harris administration. They don't talk about the Biden-Harris administration. In fact, Harris, when she's talking about the Biden-Harris administration, pretends that she's nothing to do with it. She literally talks about sort of day one. That's in her speeches, day one, as if she hadn't been there for the last, 1,000+ days of the administration, which she was allegedly an integral architect and executor of. No, sorry, that was someone else. And so as I put on in response to what Susan Rice's quote. I said, well, yeah, but here's Kamala Harris's quote. If you could imagine these words coming. Yes, I was an integral architect and executor of the policies of the Biden-Harris administration, except on inflation, the border, crime, Afghanistan, everything else. She's trying to distance herself. And so you saw that speech last week going into the convention, her economic speech, her economic plan. We'll get to that in a minute, the total calamity that was. What a revealing moment that was, her first real foray into policy. We'll get to that in the next section. But the notable part of that speech was how she was just this, it basically could have been a Trump speech. Her criticism of everything that went wrong in the Biden-Harris administration. Everything's too high and everything costs so much and prices are high and it's still, the groceries are a nightmare and housing is a nightmare and it's all such a nightmare for people, she kept saying, as if she had nothing to do with it. So this is the thing they can't resolve. They haven't figured it out. And it'll be interesting to see how this plays out during the course of the convention. But the central contradiction will remain, because she is trying to suggest that she is the change at the same time as having been right there and owning the record of the past 4 years. And again, it's not just Susan Rice that says it. When she was trying to brag about how important she was to the administration, Kamala Harris herself would say, yes, I was there at the heart, specifically on Afghanistan. She was asked, were you the last person in the room when he made that decision? Yes, I was, she said, very proudly, owning that decision on Afghanistan, which of course was the most calamitous foreign policy, security policy decision and implementation that anyone can remember, which led directly to all the other catastrophes we've seen that have led to this world in chaos. Putin and Ukraine, Iran and its proxies and Israel and so on. But she proudly owned it when it suited her. Now she's trying to distance herself, and it doesn't compute. And at the end of the day, my experience with elections is you have to have a message that makes sense, that actually is believable. And right now, what they're putting out there is just not believable. It's not coherent. It's not consistent. It is contradictory. It is schizophrenic. That is the dilemma that they have. Now, of course, they can get away with it because they have the media totally covering for them. And that is the real theme we've seen. There's probably no more ludicrous an example of the media kind of, covering for her than this amazing thing that I just read deep in a New York Times front page story in the Sunday Times. And yes, I'm old fashioned and I get the actual newspaper and I look at it. We just got back from vacation. And so I'm poring over the newspaper and I read this long story. Starts on the front page of the Sunday Times, the Sunday New York Times, and it goes in, and I read the whole thing. And often in these long stories, you find some amazing gem. I often found this when I was preparing for my Fox News show on Sundays, and you'd find these things tucked away. And because they never, ever want to embarrass the Democrats, and they're always covering for them, often they're completely missed. And he was a classic example. So in this long story about Kamala, it's a sort of, almost like a profile about Kamala Harris's rise and how she got to this point. It's kind of, preview to the convention. And they talked to various people, including Ron Klain. So Ron Klain was the chief of staff, Biden's chief of staff, Biden's kind of right-hand person for years when he was vice president and so on. Absolutely central to the whole Biden presidency. This is an actual quote from Ron Klain. We were all united behind the idea she, Kamala Harris, should be successful. We just didn't find the path to do it. What? He's basically saying she's a failure as vice president. We're all united behind the idea should be successful. We just didn't find the path to do it. To me, that is an absolute bombshell admission. Ron Klain admits that she didn't succeed as vice president. But guess what? The headline of this article was in the New York Times. Amazing. I'll read you the headline. This is from the print edition. It's different online if the people checking up on me. This is the print edition headline. Inside the ascent of a VP quietly making her mark. That's the headline. I mean, honestly, if you need any further proof that they're all part of the Kamala Harris campaign is just completely 100% propaganda media pushing her through. And the question will be, will that last until the election? My view is that there is still time between now and the election, even though we have this ridiculous situation now where there's no election in the way that we used to have it. We have totally different elections depending where you live in the country, because we have early voting in different states at different times. So people are actually voting and participating in completely different elections with different information. For example, Pennsylvania, crucial state. Everyone agrees that she can't possibly win without it, or at least that was the thinking until very recently. Crucial part of the battleground. They start voting in less than 30 days. The voting in Pennsylvania will begin after the debate that's scheduled on September the 10th, but before September the 18th, when Donald Trump is due to be, his sentence is due to be handed down for the ridiculous New York prosecution, the Bragg prosecution. That's supposed to happen on September the 18th, after people have started voting. So the whole thing is ridiculous. But the point I wanted to end with is that even though we don't know exactly, we can't be, it's not like there's one election day and everyone has the same information going into it. There is still time. Even though there's not much time, there is still time for the narrative around this election to change. So obviously right now we are in the narrative of, Queen Kamala carrying everything before her, can do no wrong, cruising to victory, etc. That's the kind of vibe, that's the narrative right now. But there is time for one more turn, I think, one more major turn of the narrative, and we may just see it. And who knows? And the turn will be this. Actually, it turns out she's just as bad as everyone thought. She's just as bad as the Democrats thought, which is the reason they were still sticking with Biden almost till the bitter end, because they thought, well, he's bad, but she would be even worse. Until very recently, that's what everyone in the Democratic Party and the media and all the rest of them, that's what they were saying. And there is still time, I believe, for that narrative to emerge and dominate going into the election. We'll see if it happens. I think what could prompt it to happen is what we're going to be talking about in the next segment, which is her total cluelessness on domestic and international policy. That, I think, could be the thing that prompts another turn of the narrative. Don't bet on it. The media is absolutely in the tank for her, but we'll see. She's going to have a good week this week. There's no question. The convention will be a love fest for Kamala Harris in the convention center and more broadly in the media. But then there's still time for things to change before Election Day. It is not over yet, not by a long way. All right, so as I just mentioned, I think that the real vulnerability for Kamala Harris is exactly the same thing that caused the collapse of her campaign the last time she ran for president in 2020, which is policy. That's where she fell apart. Back then, it was over healthcare, where she made these promises and clearly didn't understand the consequences of the policies she was throwing out there, or did understand, but under questioning, retreated and reversed and got herself into such a muddle that the whole thing seemed shambolic and chaotic and created an impression of total cluelessness on policy. That's what did for her the last time around. And judging by her first policy intervention this time around, it could be the same thing that does for her campaign in 2024, just as it did last time. Because this speech, which was billed as her great economic plan, was just a complete shambles. As we just mentioned, it was and the Trump campaign, by the way, did this job pretty effectively. They clipped bits of it and turned it effectively into a Trump campaign ad. All her observations about how bad life is under the policies that she's just been implementing as part of the Biden-Harris administration, complaining about how everything's too expensive and so on. So first of all, there's that political own goal, as it were. But when you actually look at the policy content here, it is just ridiculous. The big pledge that they tried to put out there in advance was this pledge of 3 million new homes, 25 grand down payment assistance funded by the taxpayer for first-time buyers. Now, she's on the right track in terms of the issue. So from that point of view, strategically, this was a smart choice, no question about it. And I make this argument here, particularly in California. It is the number one issue. the housing crisis, certainly that we have in California, is the foundational issue. It's the number one reason people are leaving California. It is connected to every other issue, whether that is homelessness or the cost of living generally, because housing is such a high proportion of everyone's expenses. It's connected to things like family formation, people thinking, well, I'm not going to have kids if I can't afford a home to raise them in. It's connected to family breakup, where people have to move miles away from where their parents are. So grandparents don't get to see their kids, and they can't get to help with childcare and so on. It's even connected to issues like schools, where if people who are going to be teachers in schools, in public schools, can't afford to live anywhere near where the schools are, you're not going to get the best people. So there's just so many ramifications from the fact that housing is just completely disastrously out of reach for people. So she's on the right track in terms of focusing on this issue, but the actual policy, my goodness. First of all, these numbers that they throw out there, the record is not exactly reassuring. 3 million homes she's going to build. Well, let's have a look at some of the other things that she's promised in the past. And I put this out on social media: $42 billion to give millions. That was the pledge. Millions of Americans high-speed broadband. What's the number of people that were actually connected out of the millions that were promised? Zero. Literally zero. Another one, $7 billion for a nationwide network. Do you remember this one? Of EV charging stations. How many were actually installed? Seven. $7 billion for 7 charging stations. The thousands of new school buses. Remember one of her famous Kamala word salad things was about school buses and how she loves electric school buses. I think that's when she started talking about Venn diagrams or whatever. So that was $5 billion for thousands of new school buses. They delivered 60. So when she talks about 3 million new homes, it's not exactly credible. Secondly, when you actually dig into the policy reason that we have this housing crisis, it's exactly the opposite of what she's talking about. She's talking about subsidizing the construction of new homes with tax breaks or goodness knows what. But the reason that we don't have the housing that we need, the number one reason, is all these regulations and lawsuits that block housing from being built. And as we've talked about endlessly in the California context, guess who's behind most of these lawsuits that block housing? Her donors, the unions. Is she doing anything about that in her plan? No. So this is a completely empty promise. And the 25 grand for first-time buyers, again, it's a classic example of a promise that sounds great, but actually when you dig into it, as many observers have pointed out, more likely than anything else, it's just going to increase the price. So it'll make no difference because everyone knows that there's all these people with 25 grand extra to be able to pay towards the cost of a home. So it's just clueless in terms of how a market economy works. And speaking of which, the part that I think, really caused for a lot of damage was this suggestion, and they keep denying now that because it's been a disaster that it was in the speech in the first place, of price controls, which she called, she said it was going to be anti-price gouging, and a little bit of a Bidenism there, called it price gauging. Whatever you want to call it, it's a disaster. We see that again here in California. When you try and control prices, instead of having a proper market that operates in as competitive a way as possible, you end up with shortages and in the end higher costs. So you see that right now in California, where they try to fix prices in exactly the way she talks about for insurance, where the insurance commission in California repeatedly stepped in to stop insurance companies from raising rates, controlling prices, which sounds good. The government will stop prices from going up. Well, guess where we've ended up in California? If you want to get insurance for your car or your house, you basically can't. Big insurers, one after the other, just leaving the state, saying, sorry, we're not doing this anymore. We can't operate under these circumstances. The idea that the government can come in and control prices, and for whatever they say about that's not what she really meant. Of course, it was the impression she was trying to convey. That was the whole point of the speech, and that's the whole point of this intervention. She was trying to suggest that she, as the head of the executive branch of the federal government, would stop prices going up. That was the point she was trying to make. But when it's pointed out to her and her team that this has always ended in complete disaster, and it is the symbol of far left socialist communist regimes, their attempt to completely manage a market economy this way, and it always ends in disaster and shortages and lines around the block. for basic items in a grocery store and so on, when actual operators in grocery stores keep pointing out, like, then the reason that our prices are going up, we have tiny margins, we're not exactly ripping people off, we make 2% margins basically, is because of all these other factors, all these other policies of the Biden-Harris administration that have made it impossible to produce things at a decent cost, because the regulations are so high, in particular the climate regulations that raise the cost of energy, and that's the main input into industry's costs. And so none of this is addressed by this really dumb policy idea of the federal government controlling prices. And that is the impression she was trying to give. And that's why I think this could be the Achilles heel, because it's a classic example of someone who doesn't really understand and hasn't thought through the implications. Someone came to her, or she said, let's do something when inflation's a vulnerability. I mean, I've been through this process. I've been involved in campaigns for years, and I understand how it works. And I'm not saying I always had a good record, but I've seen enough to see how it's gone wrong and when it goes right. And I've often got it wrong, but you learn from your mistakes. And this is someone who clearly hasn't done it enough to learn from mistakes. And so they're making it up as they go along. So this is the calculations, like, well, we've got a problem with inflation. It's a big vulnerability for us. We need to say something about inflation. We can't in any way criticize what the policies that we implemented were that drove the inflation, the massive increase in public spending. We can't talk about that. So we have to make up something new. So they call it price gouging. Just like Gavin Newsom here in California goes on about the oil companies price gouging, which is the reason that gas prices are the highest in America. No, it's because you've increased the tax. You're the price gouger in chief. And you've increased the regulations that make it so much more expensive to produce gas in California. And it's exactly the same now on the national level. Their policies have increased everyone's costs. So now they're turning around and saying, we're going to go after price gougers, but they're the price gougers. They're stupid policies. Of course, they can't say any of that. So they have to say, well, what we're going to do is we're going to stop prices being unfairly raised. And yes, there's all sorts of, get out clauses they can point to and say, well, it wasn't really Kamala Harris sitting in an office, writing the number that prices can increase by. It's the FTC getting involved if there's an anti-competitive situation, blah, 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 right? Yes, they can point to all of that. But the impression they wanted to give the voters was that, yes, she would stop prices going up, rather than offering any kind of thought out long-term plan for addressing either the housing crisis, which is very real, or the cost of living crisis, which is also very real, because they've been driven by their own policies. And they can't admit that, so they come out with these gimmicks. And the ultimate validation of that analysis is not anything I would say, but the fact that even in this media honeymoon, the media threw up all over this policy speech, including the Washington Post, that literally said, instead of serious answers to serious problems, it's a bunch of gimmicks. And so as we look beyond the convention, it's going to be a Kamala fest, of course. But then in the days and weeks after the convention, this is the area, I think, that could be the real vulnerability, the policy cluelessness that has been revealed every time Kamala Harris has run for president. And this time, judging by the first outing, is no exception. It's California Corner time, and I just mangled my introduction, which we can't do, so I have to do it all again. You didn't hear the first part because we were able to edit things, but we can't when we're live on air with my guest today, Jen Horn. I mean, if you did what I just did, I mean, it'd be all over, right?
Do you know what happens? I just laugh and go, you know what? The hamster fell off the wheel. In fact, I think last week, I usually say on Thursdays it's practice Friday, and I believe I said it was practice Thursday, which would have made it Wednesday. And so that was just all wrong. But sometimes you just have to laugh at yourself. It's all you can do with live radio.
Quite a lot of the time for me, anyway.
Yeah.
Not just sometimes.
Laugh or cry, Steve. Laugh or cry.
Exactly. All right. So let's get to actually, well, I said let's get to the news, but there's some real news that you made on your show where I'm a guest. Let's remember AM 870, The Morning Answer, Southern California, and right across California. Actually, I meet people on the road the whole time. So I love listening to you with Jen and Grant on Friday morning. I'm there every Friday morning. You had a very interesting guest who's well known to listeners of this show as well. And in fact, will be joining us very soon on this show for a future episode very soon. But tell us what happened.
Yeah. So, one of the I think actually probably the most important thing that's going to be on the ballot of people living in Los Angeles is the LA County District Attorney's race to replace George Gascon. And you may remember back to the primary, there were a lot of people, I think over 10 in this race in the primary to replace Gascon, many people in his office. Now, I had endorsed Jonathan Hatami at the time. A lot of people in Southern California did. But George Gascon went on to win in first place. And second place was Nathan Hochman, who we've watched. He's had quite the career in California. He was a federal prosecutor. He ran for the attorney general's position. And he really went in and cleaned up and came in second. And I thought, all right, well, I'm putting all my support, anything I can to help Nathan Hochman because George Gascon has got to go. And truly, I still feel that way today. George Gascon has got to go. Mickey Mouse would do a better job than George Gascon is doing. But one of the things that had come up, and Nathan has been a regular guest on our program, The Morning Answer, ever since he won the primary and before. And he explained why he changed his party. He was a Republican. Now he's an independent. And Steve, he gave the best answer that I could hope for. He said, I changed from being a Republican to an independent because I want to reflect the independence of the prosecutor's office. The prosecutor should not be political. And I'm paraphrasing here, but this is essentially what he said to us. He said, the office of the prosecutor should not be political. You should be independent minded. And I wanted to tell people and ensure that they would know that I would operate the office in that way. And I thought, dang, that's a good answer. I mean, you can't really draft a better answer, right, for changing parties. And so away we went. Well, Nathan Hochman was on our local Fox affiliate, Channel 11, last, I think it was Wednesday or Thursday. And he was asked by Alex Michelson if he was ready to offer an endorsement in the presidential race. Now, I was expecting to hear the same kind of answer that he was going
Yes.
to maintain his independence, but instead he came out and said he fully endorsed Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. And he said he had to
Wow.
support the prosecutor, not the convicted felon.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so
That's the,
I
I mean, that's the real
I was
Kamala
blown away.
Harris, talking point, like
Thank you.
100%.
That's kind of what disturbed me because to be honest with you, I didn't think that Nathan Hochman was a Trump supporter. I've heard him say before he's voted for Biden. I think one of his close personal friends is Adam Schiff. So I was under no grand illusion that he was a Trump supporter. And despite the fact that I am a Trump supporter, I don't need candidates to swear allegiance to President Trump. I need them to gain my trust for the job that they're doing, right? That's very important. And so when he was so clear with us on the Morning Answer about being independent and then came out with a full-throated endorsement of Kamala Harris, and not only that, but talked about how great she was for California, and then went on to use the talking point about the convicted felon. I was like, what's going on here? So to his credit, we reached out and he came on with us the next morning. And I give him a lot of credit for that because I didn't want him to think we were ambushing him. I said, the first thing, what we're leading with is this endorsement of Kamala Harris. And he came on knowing that. And he basically explained that he hadn't changed and that he was still lined up with most of what we were doing, what most conservatives wanted 99% of the time. And he tried to say he had always said that he was voting for Biden. But I think what troubled me is that it wasn't that wasn't the question. The question that Alex Michelson, the host, had asked is, are you making an endorsement? And my problem is that he said yes. I don't think I'd want him making an endorsement for Trump. I just think that if you are so intent on saying that you're the independent, then be independent. The other issue is that, and a lot of people feel this way, Steve, that I've talked to former Sheriff Alex Villanueva. We've talked to, people that we know, prosecutors in his office. A lot of them are struggling with the endorsement of Kamala Harris because she was involved with the bailouts of the rioters in Minneapolis. That Walz's wife had said that she liked to smell the burning rubber as his city and his state burned down after those riots. You want a prosecutor to be able to work with law enforcement. And there was something about that really full-throated endorsement that I think maybe might compromise that. Now, at this point, I think I will still vote for Nathan Hochman because I cannot bring myself to vote for George Gascon. And I think leaving it blank is a cop-out, but I'm struggling right now. His polling, however, looks absolutely incredible. He's at 45%. Versus 20% for George Gascon, but there are still 35% of undecided voters out there. This poll was just released this week, actually, maybe today as we talk. And so I think there are still some voters who are undecided, but for all intents and purposes, it seems that he's got this in the bag. And so I asked him if that was really why he made this huge endorsement of Kamala Harris. He said, no, it was always in his heart. I asked him if he had contact with the Kamala Harris campaign, if he was thinking about leaving LA to go work for her. No, he said he wasn't going to do that. The other piece of news that I was happy to hear is that a lot of people had said that he was flip-flopping on the amendment to Prop 47, which is hugely important for us in California. And that's Prop 36. He actually endorsed Prop 36 on my program and said that he would support it and that he felt that it wasn't going to go far enough. So that is important, but it is still really, it's hard for me to think that what we struggle with in California are all things that Kamala Harris and Gavin Newsom gave us. And George Gascon for that matter in Los Angeles. And so it's very hard for me to understand why you would endorse someone who endorsed your opponent and who really stands in stark contrast to what the people of California want to see in terms of fighting crime and kind of turning the state around and getting it back on the right path. So it was
Yeah.
definitely an insane weekend as well with all the fallout, but it was a definite enlightening chat. Certainly my co-host, Grant Stinchfield,
Yes.
he's goes hard, and he asked Nathan whether or not he would prosecute President Trump, which I thought was an interesting question, and he didn't really give an answer to that, but it definitely wasn't a no. So
Well, it's an
lots
interesting,
to
you see,
learn.
well, I listened to that. That's why I'm so happy that we could have this conversation now,
Yeah.
quickly following up on it, because I listened to that conversation. I thought Grant made a very fair point, which was, okay, if you're literally using as your justification for this endorsement the convicted felon point, that's, to most people who are, not kind of extreme partisan Democrats, it's a totally bogus and fake prosecution. Like convicted felon, but convicted in a completely political partisan attack a case that should never have been brought. And by the way, it's not just Republicans say that. I always go back to this. The CNN legal analyst wrote this absolutely devastating piece about how the Alvin Bragg prosecution should never have been brought and would never have been brought unless it was a part of a political campaign to get Donald Trump. And so Grant's question, which is, would you have brought that case? Because it is literally the same position as DA. He's running for the same position. And so it's a completely fair question. And in the clip that I heard, I didn't hear an answer.
No, he did not give an answer. He said he'd have to look at the evidence. And so Grant said, well, we all know what the evidence was. We all watched the trial. I mean, we
Right.
watched it all unfold. Like most of us know what was going on. So he never really answered that question. And I think it's important to note because again, California is one of those places, Los Angeles certainly is one of those places where President Trump is not on track to win. And so he can't be a factor in every local race. But I think this was important when you use the talking point convicted felon, when even people who aren't Trump supporters say, you know what, there were definitely politics at play. I mean, I know some people are happy to see it, but I think fair-minded people, even those who aren't voting for President Trump, say, this doesn't seem like exactly the right move to push against him.
Is the calculation that to win, he needs Democrats who hate Trump to vote for him, and therefore that's what's going on here? Because it would have been easier, wouldn't it have been easier just to stick to the independent line, and then you don't annoy anyone?
Well, and I think that was the safe play. And so I don't know if this polling that he probably had, he had an inkling of it. I'm sure they have internal polling. So maybe he thinks, well, it doesn't matter if I irritate conservative voters because either they're going to vote for me anyway because they can't stomach voting for George Gascon, or maybe I can afford to lose them because it's more important to go after the Democrats, I guess. But I actually think, Steve, Grant and I were talking about this on our program this morning, that he's probably, I would imagine, going to get elected as an independent. And I would imagine he's probably going to soon turn to a Democrat. I would imagine that maybe he changes his party preference again, because if he wants to stay in the prosecutor's office, and he said that he would, that if he's killing it, that he's going to stay and run again in 4 years. That was his word. Those were his words. If I'm killing it, crushing it. If I'm crushing it, then I'll stay and run again for 4 more years. he's probably going to need some support behind him, and he's not going to want to be challenged by a powerful Democrat. I would imagine he's probably going to go into the DA's office and then probably change his party preference. Even though it's a nonpartisan office, he'll maybe give a wink and a nod to get the Democrat money behind him in the coming 4 years. It may be a play for maybe the long game rather than the short game.
Well, you certainly got a lot of really useful information, including the support for Prop 36, which is reassuring because you're right. We just got back from vacation over the weekend. I was checking back on everything. This was a big part of what I was seeing and the fallout from your interview.
Yeah.
And then I also saw our friend Jen Van Laar was saying that she had heard that in some forums and some events he'd been, lukewarm on Prop 36 and so on. So it was good to hear a strong endorsement of that.
Yeah, I think, and that was actually the piece of our interview that Alex Michelson actually sent out as well at Fox, because there had been some rumblings that he wasn't going to support Prop 36. So now he's on the record saying that he will. And let's hope that's right, because we do need to get something going in California, right? I mean, we've got to, this doesn't go far enough, but at least it's a path in the right direction.
Of course. Well, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have Nathan Hochman on this show very soon, so I can ask him all over again, as if he's not sick of talking about this for now. All right, one more story before we go. We've just finished the Paris Olympics, and Karen Bass was in Paris as the mayor of the next host city, which will be Los Angeles, right here in our home state and in your home city. And so she was there, and of course they were all trumpeting, as they usually do, like the first Black woman to receive the flag, and okay, great, but actually, substantively, she's starting to tell us what she imagines, what's her vision for the Los Angeles Olympics. Tell us a little bit about that.
Steve, I'm worried that this might be a disaster waiting to happen. I don't know. Okay, so first of all, just to because every Olympics, they try to outgreen each other. Have you noticed this?
Yes.
The athletes for the Paris Olympics, you probably saw this. They didn't want to have real air conditioning, so they froze pipes on the floor so that these poor athletes are clutching to cool. And then they also wanted to make sure that there was no meat. Well, halfway through, I think there was a coup. And the athletes were like, no, we need eggs, we need meat, we need protein. These are the things we need to continue to perform. So they had to bring in, I think it was 400 pounds of animal proteins, as far as cheese and eggs and meat goes. So Karen Bass says, of course, when we come to LA, we want to have all of the green stuff in place. So she pledged it was going to be a car-free Olympics, Steve.
In LA.
In LA. And mind you, those of you not familiar with LA, the venues for the Olympic events are all over the place. They're going to have beach volleyball at the beach. They're going to have events in downtown. They're going to have events in Inglewood by SoFi Stadium. The athletes are going to be staying at UCLA. These are not walkable distances. So they're going to need to have some sort of transportation. So they say that they're going to have electric buses that are going to be able to come and take people around. And God love them if that's true. If they can make it work, that'll be fantastic. But it is a very big and so symbolic of what California does, right? No more cars. You have to be out of your cars by 2035. Yet they don't have a real plan. That's what's happening here. They don't have a real plan to get people around, but we know we don't like cars. So there they go. And the other little piece of this, which I thought was funny, is that everybody knows we have a huge homeless problem in Los Angeles. And now San Francisco, they're actually busing homeless people down to LA because we'll take them. And so one of the things that has been going around is what they're going to do with the homeless people, because God knows they'll still be here in 2028, probably more of them. And so Karen Bass just this week said that she is not going to be busing. So she'll bus athletes around, but she's not going to bus the homeless people anywhere. So you tell me what they're going to do. Are they going to let the people living on the streets stay there? Are they going to are they going to clean it up like they did in San Francisco when President Xi came to town? And now Bass is on the record saying she's not busing these people anywhere. So what are we going to do?
It's just so hilarious.
It's crazy.
I mean, look, we'll see. I mean, the thing, first of all, I just have to say, so it's 2028, 4 years from now. Olympics every 4 years, of course. One thing that just comes to mind is when we saw Gavin Newsom, he was out doing his part
in his cool guy sunglasses, picking up a tire and then going back to his mansion. It's great.
I haven't got the energy to get into it. But the thing that I will say is that because he keeps throwing out these brilliant quotes that are just such a hostage to fortune. They keep piling up, and this one was actually the strongest yet, which is, people, I think I'm quoting exactly. People can, I put it on Twitter on Steve Hilton X. You can check out the exact quote. And it was, people are done. If we don't have this fixed, we don't deserve to be in power. Okay.
Yeah, no
That is
joke.
one to store away for the
I know.
future. So we don't deserve to be in power. Yes, we totally agree
It's
with that.
like every
And
once in a
so
while, he hits sanity, doesn't he? Every
I
once
know
in a while.
it's like
He
when he's
doesn't
down
mean
there
it.
with the railway thefts, and it's like, what's
Yep.
going on? It's a third world country. Yeah, you've been in charge of it. So we don't deserve to be in power. So if they haven't fixed it, I mean, he's talking about in the next 2 years, I think, in terms of his timeline, and this is 2 years beyond that. So that he's really saying we're going to have this whole problem fixed, but there's nothing that's being done because
No.
they haven't got the right policies. Again, we haven't got time to get into that. I've got a lot to say about that. We've talked about it on this show. In fact, from Golden Together, we have in one of our forthcoming policy documents is a real plan to fix the homelessness crisis. But what's interesting about this is that they keep, Karen Bass has been very strong in saying we're not going along with the Newsom plan. We're
Of
not.
course.
We're not getting people. We've got her plan, which was safe inside. Was that right, or was
Yeah,
something like
safe
that?
inside, which is
Which is
hotels.
and so it's been almost total failure. I mean, the numbers have been tiny. That people have actually been, and generally the perception is to be just moved from one place to another because they're not really solving the problem. And so it is a massive issue. And to say, oh well, we're just going to sort of not we're going to leave it there. I mean, that's just good. It's going to be so humiliating. I cannot believe that's going to happen. I mean, obviously,
Yep.
surely we're going to see what they did for Xi Jinping in San Francisco, and there's going to be this sort of massive cleanup, a couple of weeks beforehand.
We would hope. I mean, and that's what should happen. I mean, I'm just wanting to benefit in Los Angeles from some of the stuff that they're going to do for the Olympics. But like for a couple of weeks, can we prove that we can do it? And she's like, no. And even the LA County Board of Supervisors, are fighting Gavin Newsom right now about removing homeless people because it's inhumane. So we'll see what these people do. But you should see the memes going around about some of the Olympic events and some of the homeless people who might be participating alongside the athletes.
Okay, I will check that out. I'm sure I would
AI
have.
is pretty wonderful.
Okay. The other thing that's brilliant is that, I mean, just on this issue, it just reminds me. I just heard this morning there was a story about, because going back to the buses, right? And just their sense of priorities. Like, okay, is that what really is the priority? Like this kind of thing when we have crime and homelessness and all this. So their plan. I don't know if you've seen this. They're doing something to get cars out of Hollywood Boulevard, and they're going to make the sidewalks wider,
Perfect.
no cars, so you can have pavement cafes and all this kind of. Have you been to Hollywood Boulevard lately? They're literally talking about the Walk of Fame. So it is an absolute nightmare. Some of these videos you see, the kind of absolute degradation of California and Los Angeles, they're literally on Hollywood Boulevard. I mean, that's what's the shame of it. And they're talking about, let's have pavement cafes. Who's going to be sitting at the tables?
Right.
The homeless people. Like it's just.
With a cup of espresso, not going to happen. In West Hollywood, they installed all these bike lanes, but now the homeless encampments have spread from the sidewalks into the bike lanes. So they have all these bicycle people who are getting hurt because they're hitting all the junk coming off into the encampments, and now they're getting hit into the street. So all those bike lanes are gone, which would be the same thing if they try to widen the sidewalks. It's just
It's
making
just,
no
I mean,
sense.
this is it. They have no clue. And so they sort of blindly, as if they're pretending that these problems that have been there for, decades now just don't
Yep,
exist, and they can go on with their schemes that, may be good or bad. Who cares? But like, just fix the real problem first. Then we can talk about all of this. Anyway, we'll see.
exactly.
Jen, thank you so much for being with us
You're
today.
too
Always fun.
sane, Steve. You're too sane for this date.
Thank you. We'll
Thank
see you very
you.
soon. All right, joining us for Candidate Corner today, I'm so excited to welcome Leticia Castillo, running for State Assembly, District 58. Is that right?
That is correct.
Fantastic. Thank you for doing this. As usual with these segments where we're introducing our great candidates to our wider audience, I'd just love to start by asking you to just tell us a little bit about yourself and your district, why you're in this race, and what you're hoping to achieve.
Thank you so much, first of all, for having me on the show and giving me the opportunity to let more people know who I am. So my district is Assembly District 58. That covers two counties, Riverside County and San Bernardino County. It covers all of Carupa Valley, Eastvale, Corona, Riverside, in Riverside County, and then it crosses county lines in the city of Grand Terrace in San Bernardino County. So it's a pretty big district, and it was tweaked back in 22. And so it is an open seat. It is a state target seat, meaning that we have the opportunity right now to flip this seat. And considering that I got nearly 49% of the vote in the primary, we're looking
Wow.
to deliver a victory in November.
Amazing. That's so close. Nearly the 50%. Wonderful. But in terms of the district, I mean, that's pretty much what we think of as the Inland Empire, isn't it?
Correct. Inland Empire, that is correct.
That's you. Okay. So tell us about your story. What brought you to this point? Your background and how you got involved.
I wasn't really involved in politics. I was one of those people like, ooh, politics, right? I started to kind of pay attention a little bit more back in 2016, probably around the time Trump first ran, right? Before I used to work during the election cycles, I ran the show at the precincts when it was still precincts before they did voting centers. And I always felt I was doing my part by doing that, right? And then Trump ran, and I didn't know much about him. I just knew he was the guy that would tell people you're fired on TV, right?
Right.
And I started to kind of pay attention to the stuff he was saying, and I was like, okay, I like that. I like that, and that's what kind of got me involved a little bit more, paying attention. And probably getting really involved was probably around the Newsom recall, maybe what was that, 21? I started to kind of research, my party has to meet somewhere, because I've always been a Republican and a conservative. And so I started to look where my party meets, and I started to attend meetings and whatnot. And the next thing you know, here I am running for office. I feel like it's a calling from God because it's something I did pray about. I just felt like I needed to do more, not just sit around and not do anything. I do have 5 grandchildren. And of course, my grandchildren and everyone else's kids and grandkids are the reason why I'm in this fight right now. I was at service on Sunday, and part of the message was God calls us out of our comfort zone into the battlefield. And I just felt like that was the message
Wow.
I needed to hear that day. My background is mental health. So I am a dual licensed psychotherapist, and I do work in mental health, but I stepped away from my county job back in January to kind of focus more on my race. And I started private practice in order to be able to do that.
So you have more flexibility.
Correct.
Yeah. So is this your first time running for anything?
I ran in 22. That was the first time I ran. I got in the race 2 days before the deadline. I did
Wow.
not make it past the primary, but I continued to work, from that day forward until now. I haven't stopped. When I didn't make it, I helped other candidates, the state candidates, the local candidates. I continued to work to help other candidates get in. And so my race has been going on since then.
And so that was for the same I know you said there'd been some changes, but roughly the same district. You ran for assembly in 22.
Yeah, pretty much. There's just a couple areas that were taken out. But yeah, it was the same district because that's when it changed. That was the first year that it changed.
Right. That's fantastic. And so you've gone from that to basically being you must have been the leader, obviously. You won basically the primary.
Yes, yes. Although one of my opponents say she was the winner, I'm like, no, I was the winner of the primary.
So what about your family background?
So I'm a first generation American, and my family came from Mexico. My dad came to the United States through the Braceros program, the farm laborers program, and back in the 1950s. And so my 3 oldest siblings were actually born in Tijuana, but the last 3 we were born here in the U.S. My dad came over to work that. He always said, "This is the land of opportunity." My sister and I, we always say, like, we can't even imagine him not saying anything different. That's all we heard, right? This is the land of opportunity. Everyone has the same opportunities. It's up to each individual person what they do with that. And so we grew up believing and knowing that. And, to this day, it's the same thing. Everybody has the same opportunities. It's each individual person who determines that.
Exactly. I mean, that's exactly what I always focus on, which is, I'm an immigrant too, and my parents were immigrants to the UK from Hungary. So that's that immigrant story of embracing the opportunities in a land of freedom I just think is such a universal message, and it's so optimistic and positive.
Yeah.
And here, I think of it as we use the phrase all the time, but it really means something. The California dream. You
Yes.
come here, you work hard, and you build a life for yourself, and that sounds like that's what you've all been doing. And so tell me one thing that's interesting, just because you specifically mentioned Trump. I'm sure you've had this question many times, and you were interested in Trump, sort of got you more fired up in terms of getting involved. And you hear from the left the whole time, they say, well, look at what he said about specifically about Mexicans um, in 2015 when he launched, and so I just would love you to speak to that, because you're in a better place to address that than anyone.
Yeah. So when people say something like that, I think, okay, if you don't fall in that category, then how come you're upset about it? I, I just feel like, if you're in this country, if you're an American, he was talking about illegals and people coming over that sometimes, like we're seeing right now, they're emptying jails, they're emptying prisons in different countries. And where are those people coming? Straight in through the border with um, no background checks, no anything. And so they're coming into this country. So I just usually tell people, well, it doesn't affect you. Do you fall in that category? If it doesn't, then why are you so upset about it?
Exactly, and that's why I think it's so interesting. You see, and I think on the left they can't understand Mexican Latino support for Trump. They just can't understand it, but it's growing, isn't it? Is that,
Oh,
I mean, and that must be a big part of your campaign.
absolutely. I see it on a regular basis where the support is growing. When I've been out there knocking on doors, when I talk to people, they say they didn't pay attention before, but they're paying attention now because they see that they were better under Trump than they are under the current administration. And regardless on what the news tries to tell people, they say, we're not, they're trying to tell you, don't believe your eyes and don't believe your wallet. But they're like, no, we're not believing that. We're not falling for that. And so when someone like myself comes along and I speak Spanish and I'm able to communicate in the language, they kind of pay attention a little bit more and they start to listen. I always say that you can't understand what you don't know, but the minute someone explains it to you, now you can start to understand those things that you didn't know before because you can't say, I don't know anymore. Now now you start to understand where we're at and why we're where we're at. My uncle lives in Mexico and my mom had just came back and he loves Trump. He always says, I wish I had become a citizen so I could have voted for him, right? And so I find it interesting that even him being out in Mexico, because once he retired, he went back to Mexico. But he says, he doesn't give up, no matter what they try to do to him, he just keeps going, and he says that in Spanish. And he says, if he can understand it and see it, like there's a lot more people that can understand and see it.
Let's just get into the campaign a bit more, a bit deeper on what you've just been saying. So what are the things, what are the messages and the policy areas that you find yourself talking about the most, in particular to that community?
Yeah. Well, right now, think about safety and security, right? Our communities are not safe. And everyone wants to live, regardless on where you live, right? Everyone wants to have safety in their own community, regardless on whether you live in a really nice neighborhood or a not so nice neighborhood, because I live in one of the lower class neighborhoods, right? And so, but we all want safety regardless on where we live in. And that's one of the things that he did is he made sure we were safe. He made sure that the border was, people were being vetted coming through. There is a legal way to do it. We just can't, it's unsustainable letting just the border be open and everyone coming through. That's one of the main things right now. And especially like, not being able to afford stuff. It's kind of like people are coming over, they're getting all this free stuff, but who's paying for it? The taxpayers.
So you got the border and the impact on safety. What are the other things that you find yourself talking about?
Parental rights, education, the quality of education, parents' rights being taken away within this full system. There's just so many. I can't even express how many different issues there is. When I went to the RNC, I did a couple of interviews outside, and some of the interviewers, they said, "Oh, well, if who do you want it to be? If it's not Biden, do you want it to be Harris?" I just told them, it doesn't matter who it is because their policies are no good and everybody knows it and everybody can see. And so It doesn't matter who sits, who they put there, because it's going to be the same policies that do not work.
So in California, you hear a lot. People say, well, yeah, obviously things aren't working, right? Everyone can see that. You have the homelessness and the crime, and the taxes are so high, and all this. We have the housing costs, everything. But even though people can see we need a change, they can't quite bring themselves to vote Republican because the brand Republican is just not for me. Do you encounter that, and how do you respond to it?
One of the things is, and I'll go back to you can't understand what you don't know, right? So in the Hispanic community, they're used to listening to the Spanish media, right? The Spanish news. And all they pump out is the Republicans are bad. It's always those Republicans. So someone like myself comes along and starts talking to them and, hey, I'm a regular person just like you. I stepped up because what's going on, what's coming down from Sacramento is affecting me. And I know it's affecting my community. So I'm a fighter, I'm out there. I'm going to do it. I'm going to be your voice. And so once they start listening to me, they say, if it wasn't coming from you, I wouldn't be listening. But what you're saying makes sense and I get it. And so I've had them tell me, keep doing what you're doing, keep talking to more people, because just like we didn't know, there's more people out there that don't know. And we would have voted differently had you not told us. And you need to make sure you talk to other people. So every time I talk to groups, I tell them, well, now that you know, I need you to do me a favor and go tell 5 more people, 10 more people, because that's how more people understand.
Where do you talk to people when you say the groups? Just describe a little bit for those who haven't done campaigns. I think it's just very interesting to hear some details of what it's actually like and where you're going.
Right. So I'm doing things a little bit differently, right? I just kind of feel like, okay, some of the stuff that's been done doesn't work. We haven't picked up seats, we lose seats. And so I'm doing things a little bit different. I feel most comfortable within my community, and I'm going into the overlooked communities, people who never have anyone come in. Like maybe Democrats don't go there because they think, okay, we got that area. Republicans don't go because, oh, that's a Democrat area. Those are the communities I'm going into. So I'm targeting those people. I'm going to, no matter where I'm at, whether it's at the swap meet, whether it's at the community park with, families having stuff going on. I'm always talking to people, whether it's someone who has a business that says, hey, my workers are Latino males, come over here. I'm going to do a taco truck at lunchtime. I want you to come talk to them because, they need to know what's going on. And, those are types of situations where I put myself in and I'm able to reach more people, target people who might have never gotten involved or listened to anything. And now I'm being able to reach those individuals that need to hear that and need to get involved.
And what can you promise them realistically? Because we all know the numbers. I mean, look, I always make this point that California is much more Republican than people think. And if you look at statewide elections, it's like, 40% plus. And I'm sure there's many more if we had, like there's ways of, I'm very confident that we can win in California statewide. But it's also true that if you look at the legislature, the assembly right now, 62 Democrats, 18 Republicans. So even if you win your race, you're still going to have this very, very big gap with the Democrats. What can you promise people that you will actually do?
Well, for me, one of the things is that I say is, the makeup of the legislator, right? Which a lot of people don't even know that. And I tell them it starts by voting those people out. You can't continue to reward people who don't have our best interests, right? And so my thing is going to be going up there and being able to communicate to the people because I'll be there, being able to communicate what's going on, what they're doing, right? I'm not one to keep my mouth closed. I'm one to let it, what's going on and how come. And once people start to understand and see that, like, okay, she does know because she is up there, they kind of bank on the fact that there isn't anyone who speaks Spanish who can get that message out to people. And that's one of the things that they do. I can and I will do that.
I think that's really important because it seems to me that the Democrats, it feels like they've got so arrogant because they assume that it's just going to be, they have their own, it's going to be all their own way forever. And
Yeah.
like nothing's ever going to change and there's never a challenge. And that's why we have these policies that go more and more extreme.
Yeah, when I do talk to people and they say, well, why don't they tell us this stuff? And I tell them, if they told you that, you wouldn't vote for them. And that's what they want. They only care about power. They don't care about you or me. And that's why I'm running. And, that's one of the things that catches people. It really, my message resonates with people because, like I said, I'm just a regular person. I was comfortable in my career. I didn't have to do this, but I stepped out of my comfort zone to be able to be that voice for the people who need it.
And how's it been? I mean, emotionally, just as a person, this whole new role, and you're much more out there and people can criticize you. How's that felt to you?
I'm okay with it. I'm rough behind the ears. You know how they say I'm a little rough on the side. So, I grew up and, I'm from, what do they say? I'm from Corona, right? And so I don't know, they say we're a little bit rough over here. So stuff like that just doesn't bother me. That's why I said I'm the perfect person to run. I'm not scared of them. I'm not worried about them. For me, I'm doing this for the people for the right reasons. And I know that that's going to be shown in the November election.
What do you want people to know? Anything that you haven't said yet that you want people to understand about you and your race?
So I've always said that it's going to take the Latino vote to really vote their values, right? And it's going to take the church to stand up and vote for individuals who have their same values. And I get it where the church might have been silent for so long because maybe there's candidates who run who really don't have their same values, like, and I get it. They're reserving. I'm not going to give my vote away to someone who doesn't believe in this and that. I want the church to know. I want the Christians to know. I have those same values. I am a Christian. I am pro-life. I am pro-family. I am pro all those things that you believe, in scripture. And I am the candidate. So I'm asking you to go out and vote. If you haven't voted before, go out and vote because it's a big percentage of people who go to church who believe in God that do not vote. I am your candidate. Please vote and vote for me. Let's make some changes in this state.
And what is the role with the churches? Do you actually go in and the church and the pastors, like how does that all work?
Yeah. So what I started doing last year at the beginning of last year around February, I started visiting different churches within my district, just so that they can get to know who I am. They can, understand who I am if they have questions. And there's a lot of different churches, right? But I just feel when I say I feel it's going to take the church to stand up and vote, I think a lot of them just feel like I'm not going to give my vote away to someone who, doesn't believe in God or or whatnot. And so, that's why I say, I am the candidate. I am the one who has those same values, the one who is going to be the vessel for God up in the legislature.
Who's your Democrat opponent?
My Democrat opponent is Clarissa Cervantes. She sits on the Riverside City Council. And just to kind of touch on that, because I'm big on safety, I support law enforcement and whatnot. So a couple weeks ago, which was Riverside City's National Night Out, Chief Larry Gonzalez from Riverside Police Department went to the city council and asked them to support Prop 36. He asked them to support it, and 6-1, it was 6-1 that supported it. My opponent is the only one who didn't support it. So that should tell you that he
Wow.
doesn't care about the safety of the community or the people, in the community.
I don't understand this Democrat. I hear what they say about Prop 36, and they say, oh, it's going to take us back. You hear Gavin Newsom saying it the whole time. It'll take us back to mass incarceration and whatever. And it's just ridiculous. No one thinks that. And when you look at, and actually many of us think that Prop 36 doesn't go far enough in
Right.
terms of changing, reversing the damage done from Prop 47 and 57, these other things. But it's interesting that they're really sticking to this, some of these Democrats. They really are. It's amazing that they want to get on the wrong side of an issue like that.
Right. At a time where people want just safety, businesses want to be able to survive and not be robbed on a regular basis. That's all they're asking for. Prop 36 moves it in the right direction. Of course, it needs a lot more. Prop 47 just needs to be repealed, actually. But at least Prop 36 gets it moving in the right
Yeah, the right
direction.
direction.
And I can't understand why anyone wouldn't support it.
It's crazy. It really is. I think it's going to be, I mean, look, we're just getting into the real campaign season now after Labor Day. That's typically when we get a lot of attention on all of this. I think it's going to be a real problem for them. Um, Leticia, thank you so much. It's been great talking to you. I hope to be able to meet in person, and I'm just really thrilled that it seems to be going so well. So good luck to you. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so I don't know what you want to call this. Often I end with something I want to get off my chest, something I want to complain about. This is kind of a complaint, but not really, because it was actually positive, but it didn't really feel positive at the time. So as I've mentioned, I was away last week, just got back from Kauai, one of the islands of Hawaii. Of course, we love Hawaii. Go there every year for Thanksgiving. You may have heard me talk about that before. Basically, I always had this vision of Hawaii as this incredibly glamorous and exciting place. I watched Hawaii Five-0 and whatever TV shows, and I just always was, in love with the idea of Hawaii back in England. And you'd never go to Hawaii from England because it's so far. Like it's already 12 hours from England and the flight to get to the West Coast, and then you got another 5.5 hours. So you'd never do that. No one really goes to Hawaii from England for vacations. It's just too far of a distance. And so when we moved here 12 years ago, I was really excited about the chance to go to Hawaii, and we went our first year. And then in fact, we've gone every year. So that's become our Thanksgiving thing. And some years we go in the summertime as well for a week or so, which we just did. And we went to Kauai. We go to the different islands. We've got to know them really well. And so we tend to be pretty active as a family, 2 teenage sons, so we're out and about. This year we brought, each son brought one of their friends. So we had like 4 teenage boys, very active. And so here's the thing. One of them chose this hike for us to do on pretty much at the beginning, and we were staying in Honolulu. If people know Kauai, it's beautiful. It's this idyllic bay on the north shore of Kauai, very famous. It's actually the place that's referred to in that kids song, Puff the Magic Dragon. So it's lovely, and people normally go there and hang out and have a mellow time on the beach or whatever, learn to surf, eat shave ice, etc. No, not us. We go on this hike up this hill. You can actually see it from the back of where we were staying, this ridge with these peaks. And he said, that's where we're going, to that peak. And it starts off fine. The first kind of, hour or so is, there's other people, and you get to this beautiful, viewing platform. We have an amazing view. It's fantastic. But then you keep going. We're doing the full hike to this peak. It's not really the final peak, but it's the first kind of these jaggedy volcanic mountains. And so you go up there, and it just gets worse and worse. And the trail gets more and more obscure and difficult to find. And it just became I've got to say, an absolute nightmare. I'm sort of reasonably fit. I'm not particularly athletic, but, I try my best. It just was so hard. And it got to the point where you're, for like half an hour on end, the trail is just like, it's not even a trail. Like you're basically having to climb up. There's not a rock face, but like this sort of section of rock, and it's all covered in, mud because it's been raining. And you've got these ropes, and you're pulling yourself up on ropes, and then you get a little rest, and then there's the next rope climb to do. And it's just so unbelievably exhausting. And I remember Rachel and my wife, we would joke sometimes about these, you read hikes that you can do, and they give a kind of guideline for how long it's going to take. And we would always joke about, well, that's for people who are just sort of, they're not fit like us, and we'll do it in half the time. And often that's the case. We tend to sort of do these things quickly. This hike was supposed to be 4 hours. I tell you, I finished it in 7 hours. By the time I got down, because coming down was even worse, we were completely exhausted. Okay, I put a picture of it on X. You can find the photo. It is amazing when you get to the top, this incredible view. So there is a kind of a reward and a sense of satisfaction that you got to the top, but it was so hard getting up there. And coming down was even worse. Like coming down, because it's just harder, and you don't want to slip or damage your ankle or your knee. And it just went on, and we slightly ran out of water, not completely, but to the point where I was like really thirsty. And I got to the end, I thought, why did we do this? But of course, the reason is because it's a great adventure. And then I'm going to now use I think this is a moment when we can throw in a Kamalaism appropriately. The significance of the passage of time, highly significant with something like this, because in the moment it's like, oh my God, this nightmare, I can't believe we've done this. But with the passage of time, it becomes something that actually becomes more and more positive. I do tend to look back. My wife always tells me with rose tinted spectacles and remember everything positively. And even now, like it's a week on and it feels like, well, maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought, but it kind of was actually. And so I don't know, it's not a hike that I would recommend. In fact, when we looked it up afterwards in the book that we always use, it literally described the second part that we did, not the first part, which most people did, the second part as, I can't really, like, nasty, dangerous and death defying and must be missed at all costs. Well, we didn't miss it. We did it. I don't know if it's good or bad, but that was like one of our main memories of our lovely week in Hawaii. I'll let you know about the next one. All right, that's all for our show this week. Hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you check out the Big Ideas Book Club. We've got another really great episode. If you enjoyed the episode the other week looking at homelessness and the real reasons why this homelessness crisis is just so out of control, there's a part 2 to that conversation that you can check out, and I think you'll find it as informative as I did. And of course, make sure you come back here for the next episode of the Steve Hilton Show. Follow us on Apple, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you soon.